Hello, BookTube. It's Saturday, so it's time for our edition of, or the next installment of Book to Film. And this week the book is Ernest Hemingway's Farewell to Arms, published, you can barely see that, can you? Published in 1929, and then Frank Borzagi's direction in 1932, starring Gary Cooper, Helen Hayes, Adolph Menjou, and Jack LaRue, and others, obviously. Uh, yeah, the book is a First World War novel, and it starts out with Lieutenant Frederick Henry coming back off leave. He's in the Italian ambulance, part of the Italian army. He's an American, and we eventually find out that the reason why he's in the Italian army is that he was a student of architecture in Italy and Rome, and the war started, so he joined up there for the ambulance. And as I say, he starts out with him coming back off leave and meeting his sort of roommate and friend, Captain Rinaldi, who's a doctor, and they're very close. The doctor keeps calling him baby, um, and sort of worries about him and so forth. And he's telling the tenente, that's the sort of Italian name for the lieutenant, and they all call him tenente. Um, he's asking him, like, how was your time off? Any adventures? And he went to like Milan, Rome, and Florence, and all sorts. And by the looks of it, he's left a string of girls, on in his wake. So we sort of get that pretty clear from him. And Rinaldi is sort of gets him to go and meet a nurse, a Scottish nurse, Catherine Barclay, and eventually, well, he seduces her, and she's seems to be, pretty straight laced. She was in love with somebody else, like a childhood friend, and actually was engaged, and he was killed during the war, and it's scarred her somewhat. But they sort of get a very close relationship, and they fall in love. And there's a bit of ups and downs and so forth with their love affair, and eventually, uh, Lieutenant Henry is out near the front, and they get his whole ambulance crew gets hit by shells. There was a special name for the type of shell that sort of was for the trenches, but it sounds like it was just like full of like grape shot or whatever when it exploded. Just all sorts of stuff, bed springs, you name it. And the lieutenant tenente, he gets his legs badly damaged, and he gets a concussion and a head fracture as well. So he's taken to eventually. Well, first of all, he's taken sort of locally, and then eventually to Milano, to a hospital there. I think it was an English hospital. I think it was, yeah. Just newly opened, so he gets there before any other patients arrive. He's a heavy drinker. The Italian army seems to, like, it's just openly, it's just they have wine with everything. So, and he's used to having drinks. So even though they forbid it there, the head nurse doesn't want that. But there's the one nurse, Ferguson, that's sort of likes him to a certain extent, and also the porter goes out and gets him vermouth and so forth, all sorts of stuff, wine, and he just sort of imbibes completely. But in the meantime, his sweetheart, Catherine, is being transferred to that hospital, and she gets put on nights, and they sort of carry on their love affair at night. And Hemingway is fairly, descriptive in many ways of, it's pretty clear what was going on. They weren't playing checkers at nighttime. Let's put it that way. And then, eventually she gets pregnant. Um, that causes a little, concern. But he gets healed, like his legs heal. But he gets jaundice because of all his drinking. And but because of that, the head nurse finds all the bottles, and then he gets his leave cut, and and he's sent back to the front. So he's back at the front, and again they're with this big offensive, and then there's a retreat, and he gets sort of caught up in this, but he doesn't even get to the front with his crew, because their ambulance car gets bogged down in mud. And there's lots of sort of connections, not connections, but meetings with locals and things like that, and orphaned young teenage girls, and it gets a little strange in a few places there. But so he and his crew, one of his crew, sort of buggers off and disappears. He goes AWOL. He deserts, basically. And there's a bridge, so they get across this bridge, or he starts to, and he gets caught by the Italian authorities. And because he's an officer, they're grabbing every officer, and they're saying that they're cowards because they're retreating, and basically they're just shooting them. They're just shooting generals, you name it. So he says, "Oh, f this. I'm not part of this army anymore." So he escapes, and he goes he goes first back to Milan to find he finds her, Catherine, and yeah, and then I'm not sure if it's sort of remembering now, or forgotten, whether I think maybe that time that he finds out that she's pregnant, and they decide that they're gonna go to Switzerland, because they go up to a town near Switzerland, on a lake that's borders Switzerland. And because he's American and she's Scottish, they figure they won't have any problem if they can get into the country. Meanwhile, they got to make a midnight flight, because and run, go across the lake, because the army and the police are going to be there early morning to arrest him, because they know he's there, even though he's now in mufti, or civilian clothing, but he is the deserter. So they do get into Switzerland, and they stay there the winter, and she just gets more pregnant, obviously, and to have the baby there. The baby is born, is stillborn, and then eventually she dies, and it's the end of the book. I had read this before, and I didn't really remember much about it at all. I'd also read a number of other books by Hemingway, Islands in the Stream, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Old Man in the Sea. And I remember disliking Old Man in the Sea, but I didn't really remember many of these. And I also read the short story collection, Snows of Kilimanjaro, and I remember liking the story Snows of Kilimanjaro, but I still don't remember what it was really about. But it is something I'll probably revisit. But I realized that I think there is a reason, because while I was reading this, I was remembering bits of it, and I really remembered the Switzerland parts near the end, the last sort of 50 or 70 pages. His dialogue, Hemingway's dialogue, I found just atrocious. It's just repetition, repetition. Do you love me? And he goes, yes. Do you really love me? Yes. And it's not just like once or two times. It's like a page, 2 pages it goes on with this. And it's like just, oh, it's just too much. But, and I thought, just before I started the video here, I just thought, oh, I'll just Google to see what, Hemingway, dialogue. And it's like, post after post, and the critics talking about how amazingly great his dialogue is. And then like there's one thing saying that critics highly praise his dialogue as being realistic, and then the person goes on to say, however, once you examine it closely, you find it's not real. And I go, well, you don't have to examine it at all closely. Like, there might be one or two people in the world that speak like this, but not every time it happens. And it's not just between them that it happens throughout the dialogue with other people as well. And it's just, apparently, I guess it was Hemingway's style to repeat so people remember stuff, and it just turns you off, or it turns me off. It's just bad. It's very bad dialogue, and I don't know. So I'm not enthused to really read more of Hemingway. However, because I do want to eventually rewatch For Whom the Bell Tolls, also with Gary Cooper, but it was with Ingrid Bergman, 19. I think it was in the 40s, I think, or 50. I can't remember when the film was done, but I want to reread that, and then I do have a collection of his 52 short stories. And I definitely want to reread Green Hill. I'm sorry, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, and then there's a book called The Green Hills of Africa, which I probably want to look at some point. It's him out, shooting animals, and it sounds like that, he just keeps talking about he's with other friends on the safari, and he keeps talking about, oh, so and so shot a bigger elephant than I had, or a bigger whatever, like, okay, but I might be interested in other parts of the story, and I found out by reading in the booklet for Farewell to Arms from the Blu-ray. Gary Cooper, I guess, became a big friend of Hemingway, and they did go out hunting and shooting. And so was Howard Hawks, the director. But Hemingway just hated the adaptation for this, and he hated most of the adaptations that were done for films, and he tried to balk and didn't want things done until later, I think in the 50s. And he allowed more stuff to be done, and he refused to be pulled into Hollywood to write. But anyway, let's forget the book for the moment and go to the film. 1932, Frank Borzage, prolific filmmaker, started in the silent era, he acted as well and went right to late 50s. I think directed over 100 films, or close to 100 films. And I do like his stuff. I like his silent stuff, especially Street Angel and Seventh Heaven are just beautiful films. They're just beautifully filmed, and so is A Farewell to Arms. Like you can just see sort of on the cover there, the ambulance, on its side. It's just beautifully photographed. Like the beginning scenes start out, they look a bit dodgy today because they're miniatures, but it still looks neat as there's sort of almost a convoy of ambulances going across a cliff road, and which is kind of neat. But there's just holding this booklet here. There's a really good quote there's a really tiny essay. I wouldn't even call it an essay. It's just it's a couple pages in here by Jeff Andrew, who was a film programmer for BFI South Bank. But he makes a very good point in here, and he says, a book and a film are not at all the same thing, and we expect and get different things from them. True. Borzage, or who did the dialogue for this, or the Scriptplay, Grace Dubray, and they corrected some of the like, they fixed up. There's none of that BS that's in the book. There is a bit that actually is pretty good. It's almost like a verbal boxing match between him, the lieutenant, and the nurse, where she's asking him about his the other women he's had in his life, and he's it's like a verbal boxing match back and forth, and it's like, she's saying, oh, I know you're lying to me and stuff, and that is that is in the book. That is a dialogue scene, but then they've taken out all the BS, and just added the good stuff, the verbal back chat back and forth, which was quite nice to see. And Adolph Menjou played the Dr. Rinaldi, Captain Rinaldi, and they changed the story quite a bit. It's because in the story, in the book, they both go to Switzerland together. In the film, she, after he gets sent back to the front at the hospital, she goes directly to Switzerland, and she knows she's pregnant, but he doesn't know yet. And his letters, his friend Captain Rinaldi is sort of censoring his letter. Well, he doesn't even read them. He just sort of sends them back, and sends hers back, saying that, he's thinking too much about her and he doesn't want that for his friend. So there's those kind of changes, but the character of Rinaldi is kind of interesting. Didn't think they fully flushed him out as much in the film as he is in the book. So I'm saying there's some good aspects of the book, and there's as well as there's a priest in there that the lieutenant talks to a lot, and that's Jack LaRue, and he shows up in the film, but very, you can see he's sort of it's an interesting character, and it's an interesting relationship between the two, but it's not fleshed out. It's not even fleshed out enough in the book for me. I wish there was more between the priest and Tenete, the Lieutenant Henry. I wish there were more scenes with him, and fleshed out a little more. I really like that interaction there that was in the book, and then, but as I say, it was a little less in the film. But as a film, it's a beautifully made film. It's like when he decides, well, he doesn't, he's not retreating, and they cut out all that part about the army, shooting their own men, and I think that might have been I kind of figure that was this is at the time, 1932, where the Hayes Commission sort of come in, or at least the they weren't supposed to, the censorship, but it was more or less censorship at the time. Until 1936, I think that they really clamped down. But I think that might have been something the studio might have said. It was Paramount that did it, and they might have said something. Well, that's just, we'll gloss over that part. So he actually deserts, and he's walking back, and he's wanting to get back to Milan, and where he thinks Catherine is, because he hasn't, he just finds out that all his letters have been, that's when he decides all his letters to her have been sent back as well. But it's his walk back, and there's huge, the army is walking back, so there is a retreat, so they are showing that, but they're not acknowledging it. And then there's civilians as well. They're being bombed, they're being attacked, all sorts of stuff like that. And it's just beautiful lighting, because it's all at nighttime and raining most of the time. And it's done on a very, mostly a tight shot a lot of times, not wide expanses, a few, but not too many. And then he gets on a bridge and stuff like this, and he jumps in the river because they're grabbing him, but they don't. It's like it's a little because see the thing is they cut out the part about grabbing the officers because of desert, like saying that they were cowards. So that was out of the film. So all of a sudden they pick him out of a crowd of people, and it's like, and there's nobody there that knows him specifically, know that he has deserted. So it's a little question mark, but if you've read the book, you kind of what the situation is, even though they're not saying it in the film. But yeah, the cinematography, the lighting is amazing. The acting's pretty good. Well, Gary Cooper, he's an important actor in in sort of classic Hollywood film. I Again, he's one of these actors that was popular, and I just didn't think that he was competent, but he wasn't a great actor. I don't think. Like you could see, holes in him. He's stilted and stuff like that at times, and I think and in some ways that was part of his charm as well. I think the height of his acting is stuff like High Noon, as well as his co-star in there. Lon Chaney Jr. is probably this Lon Chaney Jr.'s best acting scene is in there, but it's an aside in High Noon. But yeah, and there's some really great stuff like when he's wounded and he's being taken to Milan, and they've got the camera basically like where his head is, and he's on the stretcher, he's looking up, so it's everything. Like, all you do is see the ceilings, and you see people sort of looking down over him and stuff, and it's just fantastic. And they don't tilt the camera until Catherine comes in and goes up to him and kisses him, and she comes right up to the camera and just sort of blurred out of the camera, and then after she kisses him, the camera moves and as normal, and it's just fantastic, all that, because Borzage still used a lot of his silent film abilities and could still do that in 1932. It's the book is not great. It's an interesting story because I find it interesting, like rereading it, because I'd forgotten that it had to do with actually the Italian army. So I find that interesting, that it's in the Italian army, so it's a different aspect. So that's fabulous. And like I say, there are some good spots in it, and I should have actually got the sort of there's a special edition that had a whole bunch of other stuff, because apparently like there's like 46 different endings that Hemingway was trying to do before he settled on the one that I read, like the published one. That would have been actually quite nice to read and actually compare to see, because it might have actually made the book reading enjoyment better, or if not, at least go, oh geez, he was a horrible writer, and he finally turned out a book that was but I don't know, I haven't read that. And even in the film there is an alternate ending. There's a happy ending in the film as well. And in here, it's lacking a lot of extras. The extras mainly is the book here, because there's a long essay, fairly long essay of Borzagi's film career, and it's very good. It's very good. It's by it was written in 1997. Trying to find it who, by Kent Jones. It's actually quite good, and then but there's no commentary, which is it's a BFI one, and that's too bad. I think it would have it should have had a nice commentary with it, because talking about Borzage, Helen Hayes, Adolph Menjou, Jack LaRue, and Gary Cooper, and the cinematography of it, that would have been great. But there are some sort of shorts, World War I shorts. And there's some description in each of them. There is well, there's the alternate endings, and there's war scenes in India, Austrian prisoners in concentration camp, and latest crime of the sinister Hun, um, and all 1918-ish. Um, well, one is a war scenes in Italy. It's 1915. And there's little, in the booklet, there's little paragraph each by Bryony Dixon, who is BFI, and she's very good, she's very knowledgeable, especially about silent film, and she helped run or did most of the organization and selection of films for the British Silent Film Festival that used to be on, which was great. And she was always great to pigeonhole and talk and to ask some questions that you just never get answers to otherwise. So I really enjoyed going there. Um, no commentary is the biggest thing that I um, dislike about it. But yeah, it was funny because like in here it talked about Hemingway in the booklet hating the knowing that there was an alternate ending there. Meanwhile, according to the booklet, there was 46 endings he had, including some happy endings. But Hemingway was an odd guy. But anyway, that's it. And as I said, this is Italian Army. Next week I'm going to be I don't have it here in front of me, but it's going to be All Quiet on the Western Front, Louis Milestone's production of that, and it's from the from the book Eric Maria Remarks, All Quiet on the Western Front, and that'll be next week. So this is the Italian sort of perspective, and then they'll have the German perspective. And I was trying to figure out, I don't know. Well, I don't have any of the films really. I've got films from a British perspective, obviously. Or do I have First World War? But I've got an American perspective, like there's The Parade's Gone By for silent. That's just fabulous. King Vidor, and then I need a French one, which I could use J'accuse, I suppose. Or there's some other ones, French ones. So it'd be neat to compare the Italian army, the French army, the German, Russian, English, and American. That would be interesting as a comparison to films. But again, it's either do you stick to silent, which I don't know about Italian and silent, or try to stick to 30s, which you could do with most of these, but I don't know about, again, Russian ones, and but I know there's some German ones, I think in the 30s, World War One, I believe. But yeah, you might have to mix them up a little bit. But that would be an interesting thing to do. But there's obviously not a book for each of these ones that I mentioned, because like The Parade's Gone By, there was no book it was based on. J'accuse, there was no book it was based on. And many things like that. But anyway, I will end it there, BookTube. We're up to 30 minutes. I was thinking I'd get this done sooner, but yeah, it's a good film. And an okay book, but it's not something that I would recommend really highly. But if you're going to read it, I would suggest trying to find the special edition one with all the extra material, and probably footnoted and annotated. But definitely the films we're seeing, Frank Borzage is an interesting director, and I think an important director for Hollywood. Anyway, I will see you next week, BookTube.